The room was full of people. His mother pointed at her and said she was completely unfit. His best friend laughed. Her husband nodded and told her to kneel, right there in front of everyone, just to touch her own baby. What none of them knew would destroy them all. The hallway of that hospital smelled like antiseptic and fresh flowers somebody brought, but nobody really chose. The kind of flowers you grab when you don't know what to say. Celeste could smell them from behind the closed door of her room, and she thought about how strange it was, that people always showed up with things when they didn't know what to bring of themselves. They brought flowers, they brought balloons, they brought noise. But the one thing she needed, which was simply to be left alone with her son and the enormous quiet of what she had just done, nobody brought that. Nobody ever brings that. She had been in labor for 14 hours. 14 hours of something that rearranged every muscle and every nerve and every idea she had ever had about what her body was capable of. And when her son finally came into the world, the first thing she felt was not pain. It was not relief either, though relief was somewhere in there too. It was peace. The kind of peace that doesn't make noise. The kind that just settles inside your chest like a warm stone placed there by something much larger than your own understanding. She had held him for maybe 40 minutes when the door opened. Loretta walked in first. She always walked in first, not because she had somewhere to be, but because walking in first was something she had made her entire personality. She was a tall woman, sharp at the edges, dressed like she had somewhere more important to be after this. She swept her eyes around the room the way a building inspector sweeps a room, looking for violations, and let them land on everything except Celeste. She looked at the monitors. She looked at the flowers on the windowsill. She looked at the baby. Then she walked over and lifted him right out of Celeste's arms. She didn't ask. She didn't pause. She didn't look at Celeste when she did it. She just reached in and took him the way you take a thing that belongs to you, that has always belonged to you, that you are only now reclaiming. And Celeste watched it happen and felt something move deep inside her. Not anger, not yet, but something older and quieter than anger. Something that had no name, but that every woman who has ever been made to feel like a visitor in her own life would recognize immediately. Damon stood near the window. He had his phone face down on the sill, but kept glancing at it anyway, the way people do when they're pretending not to care about something they are very much caring about. He said nothing when his mother picked up the baby. He just cleared his throat and looked at the parking lot, like the parking lot had something interesting happening in it, like the parking lot deserved his attention more than his wife did on the day she had given birth to his son. Curtis came in behind him, leaning in the doorway like he was too casual to fully commit to being in the room. He had been Damon's best friend since they were boys in the same neighborhood, and in all those years, he had never once found anything that deserved to be taken seriously. He looked at Celeste in the hospital bed, pale, exhausted, the particular undone quality of a woman who has just moved a mountain, and made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but lived right next to one. She always did wear everything on her face, he said, to nobody and everybody. Celeste said nothing. Monique arrived 10 minutes later. She was dressed the way someone dresses when they want to remind a room that they got up this morning and thought carefully about how they looked. Heels in a hospital, a coat that cost more than most people's car payments. She was carrying flowers, not for the baby, not for Celeste. She walked straight to Damon and handed them to him. He took them like he had been expecting them, like this was a thing they had discussed, like this was a choreography they had rehearsed. Celeste watched that exchange and felt the air in the room change. Something shifted in those 3 seconds. The handoff of the flowers, the way Damon's face softened, the way Monique's hand lingered just a half-second too long on his. A wife notices these things. A woman who has been paying attention notices these things. It was a small thing, But Celeste had always been a woman who noticed small things and who understood that small things are almost never small. Loretta was still holding the baby. She had begun to speak to him in that soft, exclusive language grandmothers sometimes use, the kind that doesn't include anyone else in the room, the kind that draws a circle around two people and keeps the world outside it. But then she looked up, and the expression on her face sharpened into something else. "This child is going to need stability," Loretta said. She was not talking to the baby anymore. "He is going to need to be around people who have their heads on straight, people who are not emotional, people who are capable." She paused on that last word and let it fall where it was going to fall. Celeste extended her arms, quietly, without a word, just her arms, open, reaching for her son. Loretta pulled the baby slightly closer to herself. "I just think," she said, her voice taking on that particular sweetness that knives borrow sometimes, "that before we start handing him around, certain things need to be addressed. There have been concerns about your behavior during the pregnancy, about the way you have been carrying yourself in this family, and I think it is time for you to show this family some humility, some real gratitude, for everything we have done, for everything we have put up with, for the life that this family has given you, a life you would not have had otherwise." The room went quiet in that specific way that tells you something is about to happen, the kind of quiet that has shape and weight to it. Celeste felt it press against her from all sides. Damon turned from the window, and what Celeste saw on his face was not shame. It was not reluctance. It was not even discomfort. It was agreement, slow and decided, and already finished agreeing before she even looked at him. He had made his choice before he walked into this room. He had made his choice before this day. She understood that now with a completeness that was almost calm. "Celeste," he said, and that one word, her name, came out of his mouth like a request, like he was asking her to just go ahead and make this easier for everyone, like that was the thing she owed the room. She looked at him for a long time. She looked at Curtis, who was studying the floor now with the focus of a man who has suddenly discovered architecture. She looked at Monique, who was watching Celeste with eyes that were almost clinical, the careful, measuring eyes of someone who is studying a reaction. And then Celeste looked at her mother-in-law, holding her son, waiting with that particular patience of a woman who expects to get what she wants. And she got down on her knees. She did it slowly, and she did not cry. She kept her back straight and her chin up and her face as still as a lake on a morning with no wind. She said the words they were asking for. She said them evenly and clearly, and gave nothing away. She apologized to Loretta in a voice that had no tremor in it, and she meant none of it, but she said it. And the reason she said it was not weakness. Weakness would have been to fall apart. Weakness would have been to cry and beg and give them the performance they were looking for. What Celeste did instead was something else entirely. She said the words and kept what mattered, her stillness, her composure, her plan, locked inside a part of herself that none of them could reach. Loretta smiled. Curtis exhaled. Damon looked back out the window. Monique watched Celeste rise from her knees, with something complicated moving across her face, something that almost looked like she was recalibrating, like she had expected something different from this woman and was updating her understanding. The baby was handed to Celeste. She held her son against her chest and felt his weight settle into her arms, that specific, irreplaceable weight that belongs to no one else in the world. And she closed her eyes for exactly one moment. She breathed in, she breathed out, she held him. And somewhere across the city, in a quiet office on the 14th floor of a building that bore no signs and asked for no attention, an attorney named Gerald Okafor was sitting behind a mahogany desk. In front of him sat a manila folder. He had been trying to reach Celeste Beaumont Harris for 3 weeks. Her name was written on the tab of the folder in clean black ink. Beneath her name, a number that required no additional words around it. $60 billion. He stacked the papers neatly, made a note in his calendar, and decided he would try her again tomorrow. To understand Celeste, you have to go back, not far, not to some ancient thing, not to something dramatic, just back to a house on a quiet Atlanta street where a man named Walter Beaumont made pancakes every Sunday without fail. Walter was not the kind of man who talked about money, not because he was ashamed of it and not because he was hiding it, though in a practical sense he was, and deliberately so. He did not talk about money because Walter had a belief, a deeply held one he had arrived at over decades of watching people, that money is the fastest way to find out who someone really is, and that the truest version of that finding happens when the money is invisible, when people cannot see it, when they must simply respond to the person in front of them with nothing to help them calculate their interest. He drove an old Ford truck that he had owned for 11 years. He wore simple clothes, the same 5 shirts in rotation, khakis that had seen better days, shoes he got resoled rather than replaced. He coached Little League on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. He sang off-key in church on Sunday mornings with what Celeste could only describe as confidence. Not the confidence of someone who thinks they are good, but the confidence of someone who has decided it does not matter. He was a man completely unbothered by the opinion of people who did not truly know him. That, more than anything, is what Celeste absorbed from him. That quality, that groundedness, that deep and quiet sense of self that does not require external confirmation. She carried it with her the way other people carry photographs. One morning when Celeste was 12 years old, she asked her father why they did not live in a bigger house. She had been to a friend's home that week, a friend whose family had marble countertops and a swimming pool, and a car in the garage that was always clean. She had come home feeling the smallness of their own walls in a way she never had before. The comparison had gotten inside her and was making itself comfortable. Walter set down his coffee. He did not look annoyed. He did not look disappointed. He looked at her with the kind of attention that made you feel like whatever you had just said was worth thinking about carefully. He said, "Celeste, I have never in my life seen a big house save a person from themselves. You know what saves a person? Character. That is the whole list. Everything else is decoration." She did not fully understand it then. She understood it in pieces over the years that followed, and she understood it completely the morning she sat on the floor of Damon's home office with a set of guardianship papers in her hands. The morning she left for college, Walter clasped a thin gold bracelet around her wrist. It was a delicate thing, the kind you could miss if you were not looking for it. He held her wrist in both his hands for a moment before he let go, and he said, "Wear this when you feel invisible, because you are never invisible to me. And when the world tries to make you feel like you are small, that bracelet is me telling you that you are wrong. It has always been wrong about you." She wore it every single day after that. She was wearing it the morning she met Damon. He had come into the nonprofit organization where she worked, a community development office on the west side of Atlanta, for a donor event. He was charming in that easy, practiced way some men are. He had a good smile and knew exactly how to use it. He noticed her across the room and made no effort to hide the fact. By the end of the evening, he had her number. What she liked about him at first, and this matters, was that he seemed to listen. He asked her real questions about her work and did not look at his phone while she answered. He remembered what she told him. He brought her coffee exactly the way she had mentioned once in passing that she liked it. In the first year, he showed up for things. He made her feel seen. And for a woman who had been taught to guard what she was worth, that feeling of being seen was something she gave enormous weight to. She never told him about Walter's empire. Her father had instructed her not to, not out of shame, not as a game, but as wisdom. Let people show you who they are when they think you have nothing, Walter had said. That is the only time you get the truth. So she folded that part of herself into a quiet place and gave Damon everything else. She gave him her mornings and her laughter and her loyalty. She gave him a son. She gave him the version of herself that existed before the folder on Okafor's desk had her name on it. Walter grew ill during Celeste's second trimester, a diagnosis that arrived without asking anyone's permission or considering anyone's timing. She flew home to be with him. She cooked. She sat beside him in the evenings. She read to him when the medication made his eyes too heavy for the page. Damon told her she was overreacting. He said her father had professionals for this. He said she was being emotional. She listened to all of it and went anyway, because she understood that some things matter more than keeping the peace. Walter died on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks before his grandson entered the world. He held Celeste's hand near the end and said only one thing. He said, "I built it all for you. You will understand when it is time." She thought he was talking about his love. She held that and let herself cry and thought she understood. She did not know yet that he had also been talking about something else entirely, something that was sitting in a manila folder in a quiet office on the 14th floor of a building that bore no signs and asked for no attention. Coming home from the hospital should have been the beginning of something warm. Instead, it felt like returning to a place that had changed while she was gone, not obviously, not all at once, but in the particular way of a house where the furniture has been slightly rearranged. Nothing you can point to directly. Everything slightly persistently wrong. Loretta began appearing every day, not calling ahead, not asking, simply arriving, letting herself in with the key Damon had made for her, without mentioning it. She rearranged the kitchen over the course of a Tuesday morning while Celeste sat in the living room, feeding her son and listening to the sounds of her own home being reorganized. She moved Celeste's herbs off the windowsill and replaced them with a plant she had bought at a nursery that morning. She gave instructions to the housekeeper with the comfort of someone who had been giving those instructions for years. She spoke to Damon about the baby's schedule as though Celeste were not in the room, as though Celeste were furniture. Every time Celeste raised something with Damon, the response was the same. He would look at her with a kind of patience that was not patience at all, but rather the expression you wear when you have already decided the other person is unreasonable. He said she was postpartum. He said she was emotional. He said she was reading things wrong. He said his mother meant well. He said it so many times in so many variations that Celeste began to wonder, in the way that sustained doubt can make you wonder, whether she was the problem. Whether the problem was simply how she saw things. Then she would catch Monique on his phone screen, reflected in a dark window before he angled away. Then she would find a silk scarf in the back seat of the car, green, a color she had never worn. Then she would hear Damon come home at 11:30 with a story that had too many specific details, the way stories always do when they have been prepared in advance. And she would remember that she was not the problem. The problem was a series of choices other people had made and were continuing to make. Curtis called more. She heard his voice through the wall without trying. She heard him say it once with a plainness that made it worse. Celeste is not built for this life. You have always known that. And she heard Damon go quiet, and then she heard him say, "Yeah," one word. But it is extraordinary what one word can carry. Loretta made her move on a Thursday afternoon. She sat Damon down and explained to him, with the gravity of a woman delivering important news that she had already decided he would receive well, that what was best for the baby was for guardianship documentation to be established. Temporary, she said, a precaution, just until things settled down and there was more clarity about Celeste's state. She would hold the papers, just for safekeeping. Damon agreed without a single question. He signed the documents the same week his son had his first pediatric checkup and came home and talked about traffic and asked what she wanted for dinner and looked at her across the table like a man with nothing to confess. Celeste found the papers by accident on a Sunday. She had been looking for an insurance document, something routine. And there they were in the drawer beneath the electric bills. She read the first page. She read the second. She sat down on the floor of the home office, not in the chair, on the floor, and held those papers in her hands and felt something move through her that was not sadness and was not anger. It was something colder and more useful than both. It was clarity. She picked up her phone. She scrolled to a number she had been avoiding for 3 weeks. She called Gerald Okafor. He answered before the second ring. He told her gently but directly that she needed to come in, that the estate was finalized, that there were things he could not explain over the phone that he needed her to understand in person. She drove to his office the next morning. She wore the bracelet. She sat in the chair across from Okafor and watched him open the folder and slide it across the desk toward her. She read every page slowly. She asked no questions until she had read everything. And then she looked up. Walter Beaumont. Real estate holdings across 14 states. Residential developments, commercial tower projects, international properties in 3 countries, liquid assets, trusts, holdings, 40 years of quiet, disciplined, visionary building. All of it, every single piece, left solely and completely to his daughter, Celeste Beaumont Harris. No conditions, no stipulations, solely and completely. Total estate value, $60 billion. She sat with that number for a very long time. Okafor let her. He did not fill the silence with reassurances or explanations. He simply sat with his hands folded on the desk and allowed her to be where she was. He had done this before, watched people receive enormous news, and he had learned that enormous news requires space, the way a river requires banks. You do not rush it. When she finally looked up, she asked one question. She asked whether the estate had been disclosed publicly yet. Okafor said no. Not yet. He had been waiting for her. She said, "Hold it a little longer." She walked out of that office and sat in her car in the parking garage and did not start the engine for 45 minutes. She held her own wrist, the wrist with the bracelet, and she felt her father's words come back to her with a weight that they had not carried before. Let people show you who they are when they think you have nothing. She had seen who they were. She had been seeing it for months, and had been making the mistake of hoping she was wrong. She was not wrong. She drove home. She made dinner. She smiled at Damon across the table in a way that gave nothing away. She bathed her son and sang to him in the soft, particular voice she only used when it was just the two of them, and held him against her chest a moment longer than usual before she put him down. Then she sat in the quiet of her son's room and she made a plan. Not a plan built from anger. Anger burns out. This was built from something steadier, something that had her father's patience in it and her own particular quality of waiting. She was going to let them finish, and then she was going to walk in. The gala was held on a Friday evening at the Monarch Ballroom in downtown Atlanta. Black tie, the kind of venue that exists to make people feel the world is very beautiful and very ordered, and that the right people are always in the right rooms. Crystal chandeliers overhead, tables dressed in white linen, the whole of the city's business world moving through it in clusters of expensive fabric and rehearsed conversation. Damon had told Celeste it was a work obligation and that she wouldn't enjoy it. He said it considerately, almost tenderly, as though he were doing her a favor. He did not put her name on the guest list. She found out through Curtis's wife, who called to ask what Celeste was planning to wear, and went completely quiet on the phone when Celeste said she had not been told about the event. That silence, 3 seconds, maybe 4, told Celeste everything she needed to know about how much was happening that she was not supposed to see. She arrived alone. She wore a gown she had purchased years before and never worn, deep burgundy floor length, understated in the way that only very well-made things can afford to be. Her mother's pearls at her throat, Walter's bracelet on her wrist, barely visible, exactly as it always was. She walked through the entrance of the Monarch Ballroom, and the first thing that happened was that the room changed. It did not change all at once, and it did not make a sound. It changed in the way important things change, in waves, quietly, starting at the edges and moving inward. A head turning, a hand touching an arm, a whisper, a conversation pausing mid-sentence, because 3 days earlier, Gerald Okafor's communications team had issued the press release on behalf of the Beaumont estate, the announcement of its new sole heir, the announcement of what was coming next, and the people in that ballroom, developers, city officials, architects, investors, were people who paid attention to the name Beaumont the way other people pay attention to weather. The name had been in Atlanta's business landscape for 40 years, quiet, enormous, and impossible to ignore. If you knew what you were looking at, they knew. And now they were watching the name walk across the room in burgundy with pearls at her throat and her father's bracelet on her wrist. Damon saw her from across the ballroom. She did not look for him, but she felt the moment he found her, felt it in the way the air changes when someone is looking at you with something urgent. She glanced over and watched his face do 4 things in 3 seconds. Recognition, confusion, calculation. Then something that might have been the beginning of understanding if he had gotten there just a little sooner. Monique was on his arm. Her arm stiffened when Damon stiffened. She followed his eyes to Celeste, and her face went still in the particular way of someone who has just discovered that the room they are in is not the room they thought they were in. Loretta was at a table near the east wall, speaking to a woman beside her. She noticed the shift in the room's attention before she found its source, that magnetic reorganization that happens when significance enters a space, and turned to look toward the entrance. She saw Celeste. Her brow came down. She watched the room watching Celeste, and something began moving across her face that was going to take her the rest of the evening to fully name. Thomas Ellison crossed the room immediately. He had done business with Walter Beaumont for 22 years. He was a broad man in his 60s, silver at his temples, and he moved through crowds with the ease of someone who had long ago stopped needing to perform importance. He was important the way buildings are important, quietly and without argument. He reached Celeste and extended his hand, and what he offered her was not courtesy, it was respect. "Ms. Beaumont," he said, and he said it with enough volume to carry. "We are grateful to have you here tonight. Your father built something this city will be talking about for another 40 years, and the development announcement next quarter, I have been looking forward to that conversation." The room absorbed every word, the name he had used, the ease of his familiarity, the deference in the posture of the most significant man in that ballroom toward this woman in burgundy who had walked in alone. Her place at the gala's head table had been set before the doors opened. The event organizers had known who she was when they prepared the seating. She sat down among architects and developers and city planners who spoke to her with the directness of people who expected her to understand everything they were saying. She did. Damon appeared beside her chair. She knew before she turned. She could feel the frequency of his particular panic, the kind of panic that belongs to someone who has understood something too late. "Celeste." His voice was low and cracked slightly at the end of her name. She turned. She let herself look at him fully and without performance. The man who had stood at the window while his mother told her to beg. The man who had signed papers behind her back that concerned her own child. The man who had said yeah when his friend said she wasn't built for this life. She looked at him with something that was not anger and was not forgiveness. It was something more final than both. She said, "You should have let me hold my son. That was all. She turned back to the table. He stood there for a moment that stretched in a way moments sometimes do when they are important and irreversible. Then he walked away. Curtis, who had been watching from near the bar with the look of a man slowly understanding that he bet on the wrong horse, found the floor very interesting. Monique had already begun the quiet process of exiting in a way that no one would particularly notice, and Loretta, across the room, sat very still with her hands in her lap and understood, fully, finally, and completely, what she had done and what it had cost. The gala continued. Music played, food was served and eaten, glasses were raised and conversations were had. Celeste moved through the evening with the ease of a woman who has been waiting a long time to be exactly where she is. She left at the appropriate hour with the quiet grace of someone who has nothing left to prove and never did. She did not look back. What happened in the days and weeks that followed happened without drama. That was the particular thing about it, how undramatic justice can be when it finally arrives at full size. It does not need to announce itself. It simply arrives, and the weight of it settles everything into its correct position without a single raised voice. Damon's firm lost the Beaumont estate contract on a Thursday. He was called into a conference room he was not prepared for and sat across from 3 senior partners who wore the expressions of men who had made their decision before anyone took a seat. The contract had represented $340 million in annual business. Numbers like that do not disappear without consequence, and the consequences arrived quickly. 3 days later, there was another meeting. He was not invited to the one after that. By the end of the month, he was no longer a partner. He called Celeste 17 times over the following week. She did not answer once, not out of cruelty. She had very little cruelty in her. But because she had understood something, that phone had nothing left in it for her. She had received everything that relationship was capable of giving, and what it had given her was a lesson about what a person becomes when they believe no one is watching and no one is keeping score. She had learned the lesson. She was not interested in an encore. Monique left with a cleanliness that was almost admirable in its efficiency. No scene, no conversation, no extended farewell. She simply stopped appearing. Her number went to voicemail, and then one day it did not connect at all. Damon found out eventually through channels that required some amount of humiliation to access that Monique had been cultivating proximity to the Beaumont network for over a year. She had not loved him. She had not particularly liked him. She had seen in him a potential access point and had positioned herself accordingly. When the access closed, she moved to the next position. She was a practical woman. This was not a compliment. There is a particular kind of devastation in understanding that you were a strategy, that someone looked at you and saw not a person, but a door. Celeste considered this when she heard it and felt not the satisfaction she might have expected, but something quieter, a distant and genuine sadness for what it must feel like to be Damon, to have handed someone your trust and your name and your household, and to learn later that none of it had meant to the other person what it meant to you. That was a real grief. Even if he had earned it, even if the path there had gone through choices she could not forgive. Loretta called 4 times in one evening. Celeste let each call go to voicemail. She listened to all of them, not at once, but one by one over the course of several days, in the mornings before her son woke up. Loretta's voice moved through different seasons across those 4 messages. The first was stiff and had the quality of someone calling from high ground they are not yet ready to descend from. The second was softer, the third softer still, with something that sounded like the early stages of genuine regret moving through the underside of it. The fourth was plain. It was honest. Loretta cried and said she had always loved Celeste, and that none of it had been her intention, and that Monique had a way of making things seem different from what they were, and that she hoped there was a way forward. Celeste listened to the last message 3 times. Then she sat down and wrote a note on plain paper in her own handwriting. She wrote, "I forgive you, but forgiveness is not the same as a door. I hope you find peace." She mailed it without a return address. The guardianship papers dissolved in 72 hours. Gerald Okafor's legal team handled it with the quiet efficiency of people who are very good at significant things and have no need to be loud about it. Her son remained exactly where he had always belonged, with his mother, fully and without question. Curtis she gave 1 sentence in her mind and then released entirely. There are people who are not precisely villains, they are simply insufficient. He had been insufficient all along. She had only needed long enough to see it clearly. There is a house on the north side of the city that Celeste found on a Wednesday morning in early spring. It has tall windows that face east and let in the first light. It has hardwood floors that feel like they have held good things before and are prepared to hold more. It has a garden in the back that catches morning sun for 4 full hours before the light moves on. She walked through it once and felt the particular recognition that comes when a space and a person are simply right for each other. Not because of the square footage or the finishings, because of the feeling, because of the light. She bought it the following week. She moved in on a Saturday with her son on her hip and what she wanted and none of what she didn't. She painted the nursery herself. 2 coats, soft yellow, the color of the kitchen in the house where she had grown up watching her father make Sunday pancakes. Her son watched from his bouncer with the wide, pleased eyes of a person who has recently arrived in the world and finds the general enterprise of it remarkably interesting. Celeste found this both instructive and encouraging. One evening, when her son was asleep and the house was in that particular nighttime quiet that belongs only to places where things are beginning rather than ending, she found a small box in the bottom of the last moving crate she hadn't unpacked. She recognized it before she opened it. It had come from her father's house. She had moved it without looking inside it, because some things you know you need to come to when you are ready and not before. She made herself a cup of tea. She sat down on the floor of the living room, not on the sofa, on the floor, the way she had sat on the floor of Damon's home office when she found the papers, but this time for different reasons. And she opened the box. Inside, beneath a piece of blue cloth that had faded at the edges, was an envelope. Her name in Walter's handwriting, careful and slightly slanted, the way it always had been, the handwriting of a man who had somewhere to be but always made time. She held the envelope for a long time before she opened it. The letter inside was 2 pages written front and back, in the same careful hand. Walter wrote that he had started building when she was 2 years old. He wrote that the first property he ever bought was a broken-down apartment complex on the east side of Atlanta that no one else believed in, and that he had believed in it anyway, because he had learned that the things most worth having are almost always the things that look like nothing from the outside. He wrote about the years of building, about what it required, about the choices he made and the ones he refused to make. And then, near the bottom of the second page, in writing that was a little smaller and a little more careful, like he was taking extra time with it, "Celeste, I built all of this so you would never have to beg, not for love, not for respect, not for anything in this world. You are a Beaumont. You come from people who built with their hands and held on with their hearts and never asked the world's permission to matter. I need you to know that whatever this life puts in front of you, you were never small. You were only ever surrounded by people who could not see your size. Walk into every room like you were born to be in it, because you were. You always were. I love you more than everything in that folder, and everything in that folder is yours. Dad." Celeste folded the letter carefully along its original lines. She pressed it to her chest and held it there, in the quiet of her new house, and she felt something complete itself inside her, some long open thing finally close. She sat with it for a while. Then she cried. The good kind of crying, not the crying of falling apart, but the crying of finally arriving somewhere. The kind that comes when the thing you needed most to hear finally reaches you after the long detour it had to take to get there, and your whole body recognizes it and releases what it has been holding in its place. She cried for Walter, and for the Sunday mornings, and for the bracelet, and for every ordinary Tuesday in that small house that she had not understood the full value of until now. She cried for her son and for the life she was going to make around him. She cried for the girl who had gone down on her knees in that hospital room and kept her back straight all the way through it. She honored her. Then she stopped. She wiped her face with both hands. She put the letter back in the envelope and the envelope back in the box, and she stood up. She went to the window and looked out at the garden in the dark, at the shapes of things that would look entirely different in the morning when the light came back to them. The bracelet was on her wrist, as it had been every day since her father clasped it there, the morning she left for college. She touched it with 2 fingers and stayed at that window until the light began, slowly, without announcement, the way it always does, to change. Some people will mistake your gentleness for weakness. Let them, because the woman who knows who she is never needs to prove it. She only needs to wait, and when the time comes, she will not raise her voice. She will not even raise her hand. She will simply walk into the room, and the room will do the rest. Celeste walked into the room, and the room did exactly that. If Celeste's story touched something in you today, if you have ever been made to feel like you were less than what you truly are, I need you to do 3 things right now, like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded that their silence is not weakness. It is power. We will see you in the next story. God bless.